All right, everybody, I'll give everyone a second to settle back down, hydrate. All right, well, I'm up. It's my turn to share about the five powers. And when I was working on this, my husband asked me what I was up to. And I said, I'm writing about the five powers. And he said, what are those? And I said, well, what do you think they are? And he said, didn't hesitate. Invisibility, speed, super strength, X-ray visions, and the ability to freeze things. So you can tell Hal really read the chapter. No, he didn't. In fact, he can't be here tonight, but I did. And then, as usual, I reread it. And then I reread it. And then I went and found a video. And which is great because I'm a really visual learner. And there's one that was filmed on this topic at the Deer Park Monastery. But I'm glad I watched it. I'm a super visual learner, and Ty really loves a good whiteboard. I love that about him. He just goes right up to that whiteboard and I can't wait. So it really helps me a lot. So what are the five sources of power? I know the chapter says five powers, but I like five sources of power, which is what he talks about. So they are, in order, and order is important: faith, diligence, mindfulness, concentration, and insight. So Ty urges us to explore them in order to create a foundation for happiness, as opposed to the five cravings, which he says are wealth, power, fame, and sex. But then he kind of trails off before he gets to the fifth craving. So I don't know what that one is. So I don't know. Maybe it's sugar or doom scrolling. Maybe if you know what it is, you'll tell me later in the chat. But I don't want to get derailed. I need to talk about the first source of power, which is faith. And the more I get to know Ty, the more I realize that he's delightfully picky about words. And in the video, he immediately says that the word confidence, or la confidence, if you're in Plum Village, is a better word choice than faith. Because faith makes you think faith is blind. And he says, this is not blind. He says we need to have confidence in ourselves and our Buddha nature, not external things. So right off the bat, having confidence in my Buddha nature lands pretty hard for me, mostly because of my tendency toward perfectionism. I'm just openly and nakedly struggle with having confidence that I'm ever going to be an enlightened one. And because of the current news cycles, I often have faith in other humans, save maybe the Dalai Lama. Sometimes I just get really cynical and I think, well, this is just a bad batch. It's not no enlightenment here. But later on in the discussion, I'll tell you how my faith or confidence in everyday people having a Buddha nature was renewed very recently. But first, I need to tell you a story about how the universe sent me a funny lesson on how to let go of what Ty calls happiness bound to external things. So one of my friends recently met His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I'm not making this up. He's a good friend. My friend Matt worked with the Dalai Lama in the 1980s when he was on a cultural exchange with St. John's College in Minnesota. So he ended up working with the Dalai Lama. So fast forward, Matt is now my age. He's roughly 57. And he just retired from ranching. And he decided that it was time to see the Dalai Lama again. So he and his family to India to meet with His Holiness. It was a huge deal. And he brought some friends with him who were Tibetans. It was just enormous for them. So after much travel and red tape, they met with HHDL, as he's sometimes called. And Matt met His Holiness, and Matt's wife, who's a friend of mine, had the Dalai Lama bless a mala for me. And it's very beautiful, very pretty with multicolored beads. But I was out of town when the mala arrived, and my husband left it on my nightstand in a little cloth bag. So now some of you might know that my Sangha dog, who was manifested into consciousness by Deborah, loves to steal things from my nightstand. Dave Mann has pointed out that he's a Buddhist dog because he enjoys both consuming tea and copies of mindfulness trainings. But I think you know where this is going. Yep. Wally got a hold of the mala. Now, luckily, he didn't consume it, but he unstrung it. So at first I was really upset, like unenlightened feelings upset. But what happened was I went into my bathroom and I sat down. Now, why my bathroom? It's a source of comfort. My tub is there. It makes me feel very centered. So I went in my bathroom and I sat down and I paused. And because of my practice, I was able not to have those unenlightened feelings manifest. And the more I sat with it, the more I thought, this is a hilarious lesson on the impermanence of things. I mean, really, the dog ate my mala. It's like some kind of funny sand parable. I just was like, this just doesn't get any better. So, I couldn't be mad at my husband. I couldn't be mad at the dog. And I'm pretty sure His Holiness would laugh. And I definitely think Ty would laugh. I don't know. You people here have met him, but I think maybe he would have had a good chuckle. But the mala is no worse for the wear. It's beautiful. And quite honestly, I don't even use malas. So I'm so happy to have it. But the whole thing was just an absolute charade in my mind. So anyway, that is where the first power landed. Now moving on to the second source of power. Ty spends quite a lot of time on this one, at least in his video. So diligence is the second source of power. And Ty says it's our daily practice, one that can bring about transformation. In the video, this is where his whiteboarding skills really shine. So what he does is he makes a sketch of the store consciousness that Lynn talked about so deftly last week. It's here that we keep the seeds, both wholesome like compassion and joy, and unwholesome like anger or irritation at the dog. Diligence, Ty says, is the practice of the selective watering of the wholesome seeds. And then he, in a fairly serious tone for him, cautioned us to protect our partners, our family, and our friends by practicing mindful consumption. This is another tricky one for me. I've shared in the past that this is one of the mindfulness trainings that is one that I need to reread every day because it's tricky for me. Recently, out of the blue, a friend sent me a video about the JonBenet Ramsey murder. Honestly, the hook just set in my mouth, and I ended up watching a whole video about a 25-year-old cold case. Afterwards, I felt terrible. I felt like I just inhaled a bag of Skittles. I mean, it just was like bleak, empty, devoid of what Ty would call nutriments. I mean, it was just, I just thought, why did I do that? I'd spent 20 minutes of my precious life enveloped in darkness in something that I not only could not control, but just, it was just awful. So the point is that I actually do have a diligence practice. I try not to do things like that. I try to be careful of my consumption. And I'm aware of this tendency of mine, and it helps me to reread the mindfulness training every day, although I can't keep it on my nightstand anymore. I keep it nearby. So I'm struggling with mindful consumption, but maybe tomorrow I'll do better. And along this line, here's a poem that I love by the Buddhist Zen master, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, Ryokan. And the poem is called Begging. Today's begging is finished. At the crossroads, I wander by the side of the Hachiman shrine, talking with some children. Last year, a foolish monk. This year, no change. So sometimes when I get caught in old habits, I laugh and I think, this year, no change, but keep at it, I must. So moving on to the third source of power. And this one is another big one. You can feel how this is building, right? So the third source of power is mindfulness. And Ty says this is how you organize your life. You know, I liked the term that Olivia used last week when she talked about what we do off the cushion. I liked that saying. I think mindfulness is what we do off the cushion, how we do the things we do. I try to practice mindful eating because I really love to eat, but I tend to either rush through my meals or while I'm eating the current meal, I'm planning the next meal, which is not very mindful at all. So what this made me think about was the raisin exercise. Has anyone here done the raisin exercise? Sometimes you do it with kids. You have? Okay. Some people have done that. It's great for kids, teaching them mindfulness, and it involves eating a single raisin with your eyes closed, slowly, deliberately describing the taste and texture and the sound in the mouth. I mean, who knew raisins had a sound in the mouth? But it was amazing, and I don't even like raisins. So sometimes I try to practice that kind of exercise when I'm eating. Lately, I've been really trying not to be on my phone while I walk outside, which always pays off. It never fails to. But to be honest, I really like a good podcast and to get my steps in. So, last year, foolish monk. This year, no change. So I'm looking for other ways to be mindful all the time. Unfortunately, I found out that I do tune out the mindfulness bells on my phone, as my family will constantly remind me, Mom, what's that sound? It's the mindfulness bell that I can't hear, but it seems everyone else can. So I'm not sure if any of you have heard about this wearable device called a Pavlok. So a Pavlok looks like a watch, but it is definitely not a watch. So Pavlok you wear on your wrist, and it uses chimes, vibrations, or an electrical zap to break bad habits or to increase your mindfulness. So it's kind of like people used to snap rubber bands on their wrist. So it's the techie version of this. I think it might be the modern version of, the old Zen monk who used to whap the younger monk with his broom to try to get him to wake up. But I'm not sure how I feel about this. I'd love to hear your thoughts, whether or not you think it's a good idea for mindfulness or just absolutely old school negative reinforcement. But anyway, I thought the Pavlok was interesting. In the meantime, just know that mindfulness is absolutely foundational to the next power or source of power. So the fourth source of power is concentration. And Ty sums it up with the quote, "Stay and have another cup of tea." He says it's like inviting a good friend to stay for as long as possible. And by good friends, he's referring to those wholesome seeds. He says that to look deeply and see clearly, we need concentration. When we work in mindfulness, when, say, we're washing dishes, we develop concentration. I'm a bit worried about this power sometimes because remember that childhood game, concentration? I thought about this. Probably Jessica's too young to remember this one, but it was a bunch of cards that were laid face down on the surface of a table, and then two cards are flipped up, and you have to remember where the cards were. And I wondered if I could do it now because I'm using navigation apps and password managers, and I still can't remember things. So I wonder how I do at concentration. But I think what Ty is referring to here is not mere memorization. I think he's asking us to master distraction. At least that's my take. Where this lands for me is just, again, more ongoing work. Lately, I've been attempting to do more single tasking. For most of my life, I wore multitasking like a badge of honor. I was one of those women who you saw pushing a baby stroller while I was on the phone, while I was walking the dog. And at the time, you know, I think I was actually pretty proud of that. Look at me. And now I think, wow, poor dog, poor baby. And what did I do to my brain? Because now brain evidence seems to show that multitasking is really bad for you. It actually makes you less productive because of something called task switch costs, um, or the negative effects that come. It's the negative effects that come from switching from task to task to task. There are times that I actually think I'm suffering from early dementia, and I'm not making a joke here. I have lots of neurodegenerative disease in my extended family, and it makes me quite nervous. So when I struggle to find a word, I think, and so it begins. Not so long ago, I decided to do an N of one experiment. So I spent a whole day single tasking. And I really, really took this seriously. And I didn't even talk while I was doing dishes. The whole day. I'm like, I'm not going to multitask it. I'm not going to listen to something while I fold towels. I'm not going to listen to anything while I drive the car. I'm going to single task this day. Gosh darn it. And I did it. And voila, at the end of the day, my brain felt pretty fresh. And I wasn't struggling to find the word for step stool, which recently I told my husband was that thing, that small table thing, the table thing we stand on. And he was like, step stool? And I said, well, if you want to be picky, it's a step stool. But things like that usually make me pretty worried. But after a day of single tasking, I really found that my brain felt so much clearer and so much fresher. So that's a practice for me to continue when it comes to concentration. So I'm not sure that's exactly what Ty had in mind, but it's in the spirit. So coming to the final source of power, we're finally here. La Confidence. The final source of power, Ty says, is a tremendous source of happiness, and it's insight. The last Sangha I belonged to, just for a few years, was an Insight Sangha, and it was affiliated with the Insight Meditation Society and Spirit Rock Meditation Center. And you know, after reading about Insight, now I know why it had that name. You know, they didn't just pick that randomly, called themselves the Insight Group. Insight is incredibly powerful. It's the fruit of mindfulness and concentration. In his video about the 5 powers, Ty says that it's insight that can liberate us. With insight, we come to see that, for instance, there is no birth and no death. It's pretty big stuff. So I'm going to go here again. I've done this in the past with my shares. I'm going to talk a little bit about death. I currently have the enormous honor and privilege to sit with people at the end of their lives. And recently I did so. I met with someone much younger than me, and he was very much at the end of his life. And as soon as I walked in the room, I knew. Years of cancer had taken a really hard toll on the human body. And so I sat down, and there was a lot of anxiety in the room, a lot of people in the room, lots of nervous tension, lots of nervous chatter, and I even sensed a bit of anger. But interestingly, not from the dying person, not from him. He waited for his anxious family to leave the room, and then he locked eyes with me, and he said, "Nobody wants to hear this, but I am so ready to go." He was calm. He was smiling. He was absolutely radiant and peaceful. Even though he was the parent of young children, I know it was difficult. But I had the real sense of peace and love radiating from him. And all I could say was, "I hear you." And then after a really long silence and deep eye contact, which is profoundly moving, I asked, "What can I do for you?" And what I got back was pure Buddha. He said, "I don't need anything. I am absolutely fine. And, in chapter 5, Ty points out that watering the seeds are the source of the power that wakes you up to your Buddha nature. He says, don't look outside of yourself for happiness. Let go of the idea that you don't already have it. It's available within you. And what I saw in this man at his bedside was that it's available to you even as you're losing your life. So with diligence and mindfulness, I think we can actually learn to sit and be present with all of life, even in the last hours of it. So anyway, that's how I restored my sense of faith in everyone's Buddha nature recently. And I think the 5 powers just sort of underscored it all for me. So that's how they landed for me. And now I'm going to ask us all to take a moment and share how they land for you. Maybe talk about your diligence practice, or maybe just talk about anything that comes up. Thank you so much for your kind listening.